This is super exciting for all of us, I think. It's going to be very different, but we're going to have a lot of fun, and that's what really counts. I want to make sure all of our fingers are warmed up, although clearly you guys are familiar with chat. But put in the chat, when this is over, where are you going to travel to and why? So what I want to do is find out a little bit about what your plans are in the future. Like if you could dream of getting on that plane now, Tom, instead of having to wait, and you didn't have to do work, but I guess you could do work. Where are you going to travel and why? Oh, Cabo, I love that. Maui with your daughter, Utah, Costa Rica, Key West, Washington, D.C., Hawaii. Oh my gosh, I love this. There are so many cool places. I have to tell you that my youngest moved down to San Francisco, and we had a big trip in March planned. And so I think the first thing I'm going to do is rebook that trip. So keep it coming. Love this. So as you can see, the really cool thing about the chat is it allows all of us to have a conversation, even though we're not all unmuted. So please keep that chat going. So we've broken the day really into sort of two parts. The first morning, as Crystal's already mentioned, is going to really be about leadership for the times. But then in the afternoon, we're going to talk about using those leadership skills and really applying them to some conversations and some decision making that becomes so important. I hope you had the chance to do the pre-reading materials, because the first thing out of the gate is going to be for you to actually begin to tell us and explore a little bit about the styles, your style, and the style of at least one other person you're working with, so that we can begin to talk about how do we develop those leadership styles? What do we already own? What do we need to maybe own or get rid of? And most importantly, I don't view this as an opportunity to say there's a good one or a bad one, or for that matter, an opportunity to say that I have to change. I really see it as an opportunity of figuring out your strengths and all of the other leaders you're working with, their strengths, and finding a way to build on the strengths. So, assuming you did that reading, and if you are a little bit confused about that reading, quickly go through your email and pull up the email that has a couple of the links to a couple of the articles. What I would love to do is to get you to pull back on that little bit of study that you did. You took the pre-quiz, presumably, and to figure out a little bit right here. So which of these leadership styles is going to fit you most? So when you think about leadership, which one is most like you? So if we look at the democratic leadership, what we're really looking at here is I allow other people to give me feedback, to give me responses, to give me the input. And I let the nature of the group be the one that drives it, which is different than an autocratic leadership in which largely I'm making the decisions. Now, there are good things and bad things about both. The democratic brings in a lot of voices. The autocratic sometimes in some situations having that ability to say, this is what we have to do and doing it. Now, the laissez-faire, if you are leaning into this, you kind of know that comes from the French term, right? It's really about kind of letting people do what they need to do. This would be a hallmark of many startups, for example, where they allow really the people that are coming in to work in the energy the way that they want to, right? So as we go around this pike here and we look at the strategic leadership, this is often considered one of the more effective ones. And it's because the strategic leader is constantly balancing both this notion of the big picture and understanding some of the important details. So oftentimes the characteristic here is that ability to balance. And what we're talking about is balancing that that sense of what is the greater good and what do my staff, my team, my board need, right? Transformational leadership is really about helping people and organizations move, change, shift. In today's climate, one would say that the transformational leadership is going to be pretty critical. Transactional, I think we probably all worked for transactional, right? I know I did. And this is where you are given a goal and you're given a bonus. You work to that bonus. One of the downsides is sometimes you only work to that goal. Coaching style is really about developing people. And bureaucratic is, well, by the books. So I don't want to go into any more deeper because you did do that reading. What I'd love you to do now, because hopefully you've done some self-awareness for that reading, I'd love for you to play along the scavenger hunt. So this is what I'm going to have you do. I need you, and I'm going to give you about 5.5 minutes. I need you to go through your house and find one item. I see that some chat is saying that there's some audio issues. Sometimes this will happen. I'm going to go off video for just a moment. I'm going to toggle myself in and out. Sometimes this is what will make a difference for us. I'm going to do that from time to time because we're all in houses and sometimes we have to work with that. No worries. So this is what you're going to do. We're going to give you about 6 minutes. I need you to go through the house, and what I want you to find is something that's symbolic of your leadership type, right? And then I want you to find, if you can, something that's symbolic or captures the essence of a leadership that you have to work with. So when I did this earlier, I brought my yoga mat and I brought a dictionary. Now I'll explain to you why I brought those two items later. But I'm going to give you now an opportunity to run through your house. And all I want you to do, as I've said, is I need you to find something that kind of represents your leadership type. I'm going to go back to those leadership types so you can see them. Represents your leadership type and one that recognizes yours. So guys, this is what I want to do with this. We'll give everybody, I'm going to give you the next set of directions while we're making sure everybody is back to us. But in essence, as I said to you, the goal of this exploration is we're not getting, super deep into what is a leadership, what leadership styles each and every one is. And I don't, it's not a judgmental. It's not easy always to completely shift the leadership styles, but we can play to our strengths. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put you in a breakout room. It's a very quick breakout. We're going to put you in a breakout room. And what we'd like you to do is simply share with the folks in the breakout room the strength of your leadership style, the strength of the companion style, and have a little bit of a conversation about how you build on the strengths. How do you take a leadership style that's a little bit different and use it as a partnership with your leadership style? Because in many cases, that's the ticket to success. So many of you are democratic leadership. A good chunk of you are strategic leaders, and there's a nice rounding out of coach style leadership. I have to say the other thing that's really cool is that there's zero, at least no one's claiming to be autocratic. So that's pretty cool because democratic, strategic, and coach style leadership are all leaderships that really help us get the job done and help us bring the people together. Guys, here's the deal. What I love about this particular quote is that it really helps us understand that what differentiates us is not necessarily the philosophy, the personality, or the style of management. It really has an awful lot to do with our action logics. And you should have seen this in some of the reading, but it's how we operate in our space. How when a power or a safety or things like pandemics, you put pressure on us, how we react to that. And so what I really love about the studies is that those of us that kind of own the logic, the action logic, those of us that begin to have this really wonderful introspection can begin to get on their own voyage, and they can shape or shift. And it allows us to adapt over time. So one of the things that we taught that was in the reading, and I want to go over real quickly, are the typical action logics. So these are, again, the things that kind of are your triggers, right? It's how you're going to interpret what's happening around you. So the opportunist is someone who really seeks to win any way possible. The good news is if you have an emergency, as we have experienced, or a real sales opportunity, That's the kind of action logic that's going to help you succeed. The diplomat is someone that avoids overt conflict, but also brings people together. The expert is someone who really is logic and expertise. I have to say that I work with a leader that has this action logic in full gear, and they're very good as an individual contributor. So sometimes what I find is when I'm working with someone that is spurred on by that, is I have one-on-one conversations with them. The alchemist really sort of sees the big, but understands taking the details seriously. I look at this as the kind of person, if the organization is in need of change and you've got someone on your board, your president-elect, your current president, someone there, someone on staff who really understands this, is going to help be a catalyst. The achiever is someone who really is focused on what's the goal. Where do I have to get to? And they're looking at how do I make that happen. The individualist is more about me, right? The individualist is more about my own goals, my own skills. But the cool thing is, when you're starting to launch, you're trying to come up with a new solution or a new way forward, right? What's really cool about that is that this kind of person is going to really jump out there and be part of what you need. We've got, and finally we have the strategist. So the strategist is someone who considers the framework, but at the same time really is looking at what do we need to change. So one of the things that I learned as I was going through this process is that I am really considered a transformational leader. Why? Because I hone in on the individualist, that sort of personal goals and developing my own skills. But I really embrace the strategist and the alchemist actions. So in other words, when something comes up like the pandemic, I find that I'm really able to look out further, understand what's happening here, and begin to look at how do we transform between those two things. Do you know which action item best represents you? Have you figured that out? Now, let me ask this question. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back over to our slide and I'm going to read off those action items. Put your thumbs up when you find the driver that really represents you. Okay, so I'm going to just do a narrower list, but a diplomat. What individuals here on the call really sort of relate to the diplomat action driver? Now, if you're a CED and you're looking at where the thumbs come up with your president-elects or your other leader, this may help, right? All right, so that's the diplomat. What about expert? All right, what about the alchemist? Achiever? And I'm going to ask about the strategist. So in the chat, just share what knowing your object, your action logic, how that can help you. Just in the chat, just comment on a little bit more about that logic and maybe a logic that you see in someone else. And in general, just how can you use this information that we've given you? How can you use this information to learn more about your own leadership style, and in doing so, be able to then use that as part of your process in enhancing your own leadership styles? I want to move our conversation a little bit to looking at, we are in an incredibly difficult time right now. So that we're entering a recession at some level. We truly understand that the way we've been doing business is going to be radically changing. I love Jeff DeCania, who is a real thought leader in the profession, said on an interview not long ago, we have to be thinking about the next normals, right? We have to be thinking about not when we return to normal or what will be the new normal, but rather that there's going to be a series of normals. And those series of normals is a chance, really, a chance for us to constantly be thinking about where in the future do we need to have our focus, and in understanding that, helping us make these incremental decisions. what I love in all of the conversations in the association space around this, we've really been talking about where do we get our resiliency from in these times. So in other words, the question that we have to kind of ask ourselves is how can we be best positioned in a time of the unknown to carry our organizations and our members, and in your case, truly your communities forward. And what we understand is that the leaders that have that resiliency are really practicing 5 things. First of all, they have clear consensus around mission critical priorities. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit more. But when you have to cut or you have to augment, you really have to know what those critical things are. The second thing is this is going to really be about building strategic partnerships. I love to tell the story of another group that I'm working with, and we brought their CEDs in on a very dynamic conversation about how do we navigate learning and education. Someone has put together an incredible, they pivoted a very important 8-hour program online. And rather than being a competitor with the national organization or any of the other chapters, they went out to everyone and they said, look, we've been able to do this, who wants in? And there's a revenue sharing piece to it, there's everything. So building those strategic partnerships. 3 is strategic thinking and, very importantly, foresight. We're going to spend some time this afternoon on that, so we'll come back to that. But this is where finding the folks that their action logics are really driven by this notion of the alchemist, for example, or the strategist, is really going to be helpful for you to tap those people as you do this journey. 4 is strong, serious decision-making skills. So one of the things I've seen lots of times is either on major staff teams or on boards or combination, there's this push the decision down the road or have endless conversations before you make a decision. Your ability now to figure out how you can effectively make decisions is going to really benefit you in the future. And that means really exploring what does decision making. One of the things that I've begun to use even more critically in an environment like this, and I want to throw my screen on just real quickly so you can see this. It's something called fist to 5. If you can see that, but your fist to 5. And if I'm having a virtual conversation or I'm in a face-to-face situation, what I'm able to do is to say to the group, guys, we can move forward if everybody is a 3 or above. So the idea here is I'm looking for everybody to do at least have a 3. And I'll ask people in a fist to 5, can you live with this conversation, live with this decision and move it forward? So finding strategies like that that help you get to strong decisions will make a difference. And then finally, effective communications. All of you understand the importance of effective communications. And when we see some of, and I don't want to get political at all, but in some of the protests, we've seen them be completely peaceful and quiet. And so much of it is communications and the ability to have a conversation. So we're seeing the power of effective communications and encourage you all to find that drive. I want to take a moment and talk about consensus around mission critical priorities. Because in a time where our budgets are tightening, in a time where we have to be able to put money into things like technology upgrades, how do we make those kinds of decisions? And there's a simple way of, it's not really simple, guys. I'm making it sound simple, right? But it's answering these 2 questions and getting serious clarity. What do your members really, really value? So if I stop this, it would be really critical. And which activities and initiatives are truly critical to do that? 2 pieces: retain the membership, preserve the mission. I have seen organizations go through this, and when they go through this, they own their sacred cows. You know what a sacred cow is, right? Go ahead and nod your head if you know what that is. It's owning that you have sacred cows and saying, we're not going to do them in times of good, maybe, but for sure, we know that that's something that comes off. Now, here's a critical question. For those of you that have staffs, it's important that not only you and the board, I'm talking to the CEDs for just a moment, not only you and the board have this conversation, but you have this conversation with staff. I was facilitating a staff workshop earlier, and we were having an examination about something, and there is a piece that they have to dismantle. Well, the one staff member didn't seem to understand that. It was thrown by it. So I'm just simply saying that effective communications means that when we have a good discussion around consensus, and we use that discussion around consensus to drive our conversation and to have better understanding. So real quickly, let's talk about whose job is whose in this, because I love the fact that we've got both our, what I will call our chief staff officer and our chief elected officer, right? We have this wonderful partnership, and many of us, some of you, I know at least one of you is actually in the room together, right? It's a critical opportunity for us to understand where we're partners and to understand where we own the responsibility. The CED really owns the responsibility about empowering the board with data, with trends, with expertise about managing the association. You are the SME on managing the association, and in making sure policies and procedures are up to date, right? So it's really guiding the board, and as a board, you have to be prepared. You have to accept that guidance. You have to participate in training, and you have to invest in the right board development. So what do I mean by that? It means making sure you get the right people on the bus. And it means making sure that when their data and the trends and the listening and the expertise is brought to the table, the board is ready and open and able to digest those things. So just one real quick little example, one of the groups that I work with, what I love about what they've done here is that they've taken each and every board meeting, they've taken about a 6.5-minute slot where they take a TED talk or a YouTube talk or something that really illuminates a big conversation that they need to have, or maybe even just a conversation that they have to kick down the road a little bit. They do that, and then they engage the board in having a strategic conversation based on that. So what they're doing, listen to this, what they're doing is they're training their boards to have that strategic. Now, if you've got somebody who doesn't work in that strategic level on the board, right? Maybe as a PE, you have a new person you're brought in and you need to help them get strategic to make these critical conversations. Having that kind of ongoing board development will do amazing things for you. What are you thinking? What do these things bring up for you? How can you use these things? Largely what we're doing today is wanting to give you nuggets and have you have conversations. Play with them. Get a sense of what's going to really resonate that you can take back and have a deeper conversation. I want to keep moving down this journey right now, and I want to sort of shift to what do we need to lead in these times. So if we know that we practice those 5 elements, and we know that we've got these specific roles that are critical to us really tapping into those characteristics or those elements. So as I can see, I love this. Many of you have strategic plan, which is kind of a standard thing we should have. Policies and procedures, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Some have program assessment, why those are on this list, right? And foresight. So nearly 40% of you do foresight. So I'm hoping that when we come back around to that part later this afternoon, we'll help you sort of see the advantage of that. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we really need to focus on and get into those notions about some of the other elements of it. The first thing I want to mention is how important it is to have clear priorities and reserves. And when I'm saying clear priorities and reserves, I want to sort of focus a little bit on that reserves, right? One of the things that we noticed here, so Mariner, we manage 3 different organizations. And I don't know about your organizations, but I know with our organizations, this whole shift has been a real problem. And the shift means that we really do need to, we need to go into our reserves in some cases, because we've had to invest in some technology. I'll just be frank with that, and we've lost some income. So the 3 organizations that I manage will be fine. because we have been very clear about reserve policies and protecting our reserves. I love the fact that in the Tiki Lounge, you're going to have a great conversation on financial practices and reserves. And so I don't want to say too much more about this, except that now more than ever, it is important for us to understand if our dollars are getting tighter, where we're going to spend them and where we're going to move back. Now, assessment. I had that question on there, and I usually get fairly lower involvement on these areas. It's really hard to understand your clear priorities. It's really hard to protect and maintain those reserves. It's really hard to make sure you have the right things in place to make good decisions if you don't do assessment. And there's really 3 types of assessment that I want us to talk about. The first is programs. The way you know something is a sacred cow is it's something we've always done, right? We've always done it, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to the overall picture, right? So let me give you let me give you an example. One of the things that a lot of associations had to shift away from was this notion of a print publication and taking it digitally. And one of the things that folks would say is, but you know, we have those people, this has been mainstream, everybody gets this, this has been a basic member value, everybody loves it. A true evaluation will find out that if everybody loves it, do they love other things more? Everybody loves it, but they wouldn't pay for it, right? That's another critical one to ask. When you ask them how they allocate their dollars across your array of benefits and services, the answer is pretty low to the magazine, very high to content. So part of the assessment process is helping you make those shifts. One of the things we're going to talk about in the foresights a little bit later is this notion of the new knowledge sources and what people are expecting in terms of the knowledge, the flexibility, the frequency, and the customization. The board, a good board, and this comes from ASAE research on governing great. A board should do an annual assessment, and they should do an assessment after every meeting. And you're going to say, what? Here's the deal. The way you make sure that the board has what it needs to make good decisions, and in fact is making good decisions, and in fact is developing, is that you always practice a very intentional self-awareness and self-examination. 2 of the things that I recommend is that you do an annual assessment. How was the year? Was I clear on what I had to get done? In being clear on what I had to get done, did I actually contribute respectfully? Then look at the meetings individually and say, okay, on these meetings, was the agenda clear? Were there good defined goals? Did we use the time well to get there? Did I individually participate? Did the board participate? You will find it will tweak your board meetings, which is awesome, which at the end of the day will create the experience, which will move the goals. Just like the board has to be intentional evaluated, we have to do the same thing for CEDs. It is really important that this is a partnership, and the partnership works when we have clarity around our roles and how well we're doing our roles. The partnership works when you can identify where you need skill development, where you need coaching, where you need help, and get that. If we don't do an assessment of the CED, and that's a 360 CED, I would do my own self-assessment. I do my own self-assessment. But it's that ability for us as a partnership to make sure we're as strong as possible. And it's critical that we understand our current policies and procedures. It's absolutely critical that we understand that we have policies and procedures that support us. Policies and procedures that allow us to make good decisions and be able to act smoothly and be able to act as one voice. There's a 2 rule of thumb. I get people saying, oh, I have current policies and procedures. And I go, do you really now? All right, well, do the staff and member leaders know about them? I oftentimes will quiz. Someone will say, well, you know, I want to do it this way. Oh, what have you read the policy on? What policy? Oh, okay. or you have a policy that you don't enforce. So one of the things I always recommend is go ahead real quickly, just go down your policies and procedures in any given day and say, is this a 1 or 2 or all good, right? So a little way for you to go ahead and do that. So inventory check. Which of these policies and procedures do you currently have? Not asking about currency, I'm asking you, do you currently have these? Go ahead, let's launch that. It gives us an opportunity to understand what people have and what they need. Because this is one of the most important things, I believe, as an association, that we have this kind of clarity around there. And I'm seeing like very few folks have a Sarbanes-Oxley compliance policies. Very few have staff procedures for handling harassment meetings, and yet that has been a major source of issue for associations. Whistleblower policy is something we all ought to have now, along with that anti-harassment policy. The whistleblower policy and a procedure on the retaliation against whistleblowers, we're seeing that's in the news all the time, and it's becoming one of the things that nonprofit organizations are being called on for having or not having. When I updated our D&O insurance the end of last year, they made me show that the harassment and the whistleblower policy. My board, interestingly enough, were kind of surprised that we didn't have the whistleblower policy. So I said, yeah, it's okay. It's become really important now for all of us. Are there any in here that you have no clue what they are? If you have a question about any of these, maybe some follow-up discussions would be good. I know it's a tough question to ask, but it allows us to really begin to have meaningful conversations that set us up to have the deeper conversations, right? Set us up to spend the time on the things that are going to make a tremendous difference. The anti-harassment policy, those kinds of things also send a very clear message out to your members that you are operating at a high level of sophistication and good governance. What we're going to do now is I've just given you, I've just thrown so much at you, right? The 5 critical practices that you guys need to do. We talked a bit about consensus around mission critical. We talked about building strategic partnerships, about strategic thinking and foresight. We talked about how do you make strong decisions, effective communications. Then we looked at how do you make sure you have what you need to be effective, and that specifically is this list of policies and procedures. And it has to do with building in the assessment and, of course, having the right reserve and financial place. We've given you all of this stuff. We've just thrown it at you. And you're probably going a little bit, if I put my video on, you could see me going boing, boing, boing on the head. And the question that I'd love you to ask yourselves is, I'd love you to say, so given all the stuff that we've learned about, the leadership styles, the leadership skills, these elements, what am I going to take back with me and have a conversation and act on? Which of these things are critically important? So again, all this stuff, what can you take back? What is relevant to you? You're not going to do it all, but which one you're going to do?
Can everybody give a little round of applause to Peggy for facilitating this morning? She's doing a great job, don't you guys think? This, I hope, has been so far as good or better than you expected. I hope you're learning a lot today, and we're really excited about the afternoon programming.